Psalm chapter 77 says, I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember my God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. You hold my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Then I said, I will appeal to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. You with your arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. When the waters saw you, O God, the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled, the clouds poured out water, the skies gave forth thunder, your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind, your lightnings light up the world. The earth trembled and shook, your way was through the sea, your path was through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. May God add his blessing and teach us through his word this morning.
Good morning, Bridge42. For those of you who may be visiting for the first time today, my name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here on staff at Bridge42. It's an amazing psalm that we're going to be talking about today. We're starting a series that we began in November of last year, October and November of last year, through the book of Psalms. And if you weren't here, we went through the first two books, and we talked about how the book of Psalms is broken up into different books itself. Okay, and there's 5 books in all. We covered the first two back in October and November, and we're going to cover 3 through 4 here in the month of March. And the way we're going about it, because Psalms is an artistic book, it's a book of poetry, it gives us a lot of artistic license in how we wanted to set up these sermon series. And the way we're going about it is, whenever we were preaching on Psalm 1, I chose between Psalm 1 and 9, and I preached on one of those. And then in the next week, I chose through Psalm 10 through 19 and preached on one of those. So I had the 70s this week, and I chose Psalm 77. So we just had it read to us, and it's a phenomenal psalm. How many of us walked in the church this morning and had a good week? We just had a good week. Some of us walked in the church this morning and had a really good week. Work was okay. We enjoyed the snow, but the roads weren't too bad, so it kind of worked out. But some of us probably walked in to church this morning and had an okay week. Some people were jerks at work. You really don't like snow. Some people walked into church having a really good week this morning. Some people walked in having an okay week. It was just kind of like, yeah, that's the kind of week that I'm going to forget whenever the next New Year rolls around. I'm just not going to remember that one. Some of us walked into this building this morning and had a horrible, absolutely terrible week. And it's going to be a week that you will remember for the rest of this year and maybe even for the rest of your life. Maybe you heard some horrible news about what a family member's going through. Maybe you heard some horrible news about what you're going through. Maybe you heard some horrible news about what somebody else in the church was going through, and it burdened you so much that your whole week was worse because of it. Whatever it may be, we all came in having different moods and different feelings about how life was going this morning, didn't we? And in this psalm and in all psalms, you can see the same thing throughout the psalmist. The same thing throughout the psalmist. And you'll read some psalms and they'll be all about praising God. They'll be all about it sounds just like a song. It's just, you just want to praise God. You read other Psalms like we did this morning, and it's like, man, I thought I had a good week. It just doesn't, it hurts sometimes to hear that someone else is hurting that bad. And in the Psalms, we encounter something that is so countercultural in America right now. We encounter honesty. We encounter something that maybe is not politically correct. Maybe it's not the reserved church. You had a horrible week. How was your week? Oh, it was okay. Yeah, it was good. But you and your spouse had a fight on the way to church, and then you're both getting out and you're walking and you're holding hands. And what we encounter in the Psalms is something so raw and truthful that sometimes it's difficult for us to palate because we're not used to someone being that honest. And sometimes, when someone is that honest with us, we just don't want to hear it because our life is going okay right now. Or we don't want to hear that their life's going great when our life's terrible. But if we pay attention to the honesty that the psalmist has presented to us today, we can learn a thing or two about times that we go through troubled times such as this psalmist did. So we're going to walk back through the text a little bit, and we're going to point out some things and maybe learn some things this morning. And we're going to start with verse 1. Verse 1, the psalmist says, I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. This isn't I cry to God, and this is a grown man writing this. Not many grown men say that they cry aloud to God. So this isn't like, yeah, I cried to God last night and it was okay. This is a real cry to God. This is most likely, this is weeping and yelling to God, pleading that God would just hear me on this. In verse 2, he says, in the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. So in other words, this man wasn't like, well, things kind of stink in my life right now, but I'm going to go to bed and everything's going to be all right. I'm going to sleep really nice. I've got a nice bed. My house is locked up. All my kids are in my house. Everything's okay, but my life has kind of been stinky, but I'm still going to be able to get a good night's sleep. It's going to be okay. No, this man says that he is so troubled. He is crying aloud to God so much. He's so troubled that when he goes to bed, whenever nighttime comes, that he can't rest, that he's stretching out to God. He's yearning for God so much. He's praying and seeking God so much that he cannot be wearied by how much he's seeking God. But then he goes on and he says, but my soul refuses to be comforted. So he's not getting sleep. He's crying to God. He's crying out to God so much that he's not even wearying. He's not even sleeping. But the whole time he's not being comforted. What do we do whenever things have happened in our lives and we're crying out to God, but it doesn't matter how much we cry out to Him, it just doesn't seem like He's there to help? He says in verse 3, when I remember God, I moan. Now, your life has got to be pretty rough whenever you remember the God of the universe and you're like, ah! That's a moan. A moan is not like UGH in text message, That's the moan that the psalmist is talking about. The psalmist that's talking about a real deep down in my soul moaning. That when I just remember God, I'm just so upset that the only thing that comes out is an inaudible sound that just doesn't make any sense, an incomprehensible sound that doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't matter what I do. When I remember God, I just feel like yelling. He goes on to say, when I meditate, in other words, whenever I try to focus on God and His Word, and I try to spend some time in prayer, and I just try to think on God and on godly things. Later on in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul would write to the First Thessalonians that they should think on things like purity. They should think on things. Like purity. They should think on anything and everything. He says that is good. You should think on these things. He's talking about meditating on God. Not meditating so you can find the answer within yourself, but meditating on God. And the psalmist says that he was doing that he was meditating. When I meditate, my spirit faints. So in other words, this psalmist seems like he was doing all the right steps, wasn't he? He was seeking God. He was crying to God. He was praying. He was seeking Him even when trouble was coming in his life. He was remembering God. And he was meditating on God and God's Word. And so far, what's happened to him? Squat. Nothing's happened. There hasn't been some voice that thunders down from heaven. No, I still love you. You know, things are going to get better. Just wait 2 weeks. You know, there's none of that coming. Verse 4, he says, you hold my eyelids open. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. He can't get any sleep. What happens when we can't get any sleep? Our patience is tried. We get frustrated easily. Most of the time when I'm not sleeping, it's not because I stayed up all night reading my Bible. His eyelids are open. He's so troubled that he can't even talk to other people about it. What do you do when you're in this situation? He says, I consider the days of old, the years long ago. Verse 6, I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. So he's saying, let me remember the joy that I once had. Let me remember the times that I felt really close to God. Let me remember those times in the other part of my life, which seems like a lifetime ago. Let me remember those things. And then, he says, my spirit made an even more deep search than it did at the beginning of the psalm. In verse 8, he says, or verse 7, this is what his spirit came to whenever he diligently searched for God. His spirit said, verse 7, will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Isn't that something? He's totally seeking after God. He's totally seeking after God. He's remembering things that God has done for him in his past. He's seeking after God. He's seeking after God. And what does his spirit come up with? That the Lord is never again going to be favorable. Well, you know, some of you just thought you were having a good week until you came to church this morning. Verse 8, he says, has his steadfast love forever ceased? That word for steadfast love is a really good translation. What the Hebrew word is hesed, which means, hesed means intense loyalty, deep companionship, somebody who's not ever going to leave you. And this psalmist is saying, is that loyalty, that companionship, that person who's never going to leave me, which is God, is that person decided to just totally cut off all of that? Are his promises at an end for all time? Sometimes you got to read the Psalms, and there's times when you read them and you're like, you know, is this like a pop song? Because it sounds super, super drama queenish. But this is true. This is what a person was really feeling in his life. And he really came to a point in his life where he felt like God's love for him had totally dried up, that all of his promises he had just cut them off and said, that's it. They're not even effective anymore. You've run out of promises. And this man, when he searched for God, this is what his spirit brought to him. Verse 9, he says, has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? These are words that if you've ever been through a really, really, really trying time in your life, that you've probably thought yourself. Verse 10, he says, then I said, I will appeal to the years of the right hand of the Most High. What he's saying is, I don't understand what's going on. I've tried to remember God. I've tried to seek after God. And when I do, everything just seems to be falling apart. But now he's going to appeal to this. He's going to appeal to the years of the right hand of the Most God, meaning that he's going to start praying in a different way. He's going to start thinking in a different way. He's going to start appealing to God in a different way. And the way that he's going to start appealing to him is, remember how you used to be? Not how I think that you're being now, not how I think that you've changed now, but remember how you used to be, God? Right now it appears to me as if you have forgotten to be gracious. Right now it appears to me as if you have shut up your compassion and in anger. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, do you remember, God? Do you remember how you used to be to me? Not because you've changed, but because you know. Verse 11, he says, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. Verse 12, I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? What in the world is going on with this man? He sounds insane, doesn't he? He has spent the entire first part of this psalm talking about, it really stinks to be me. And God, you've changed so much. And God, you've just stopped being compassionate. God, you've forgotten how to be gracious. And he changes, it seems, on a dime. To where now he's saying that every way that God takes, every action that he does is holy. To where now he's saying, now he's questioning like other people, and he's saying, what God is great like ours? Verse 14, he says, you are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. This man has totally shifted. He has totally changed. And the reason he has is because he has started to seek God in who he knows God is, not in who he thinks God is based on what's going on around him, but based on what he knew to be God in the first place. When I was studying this psalm, I was reading St. Augustine, and St. Augustine wrote these words right here. I quoted him. They're going to come up on the screen. Okay, it says, but many men cry unto the Lord for the sake of getting, remember this man cry, he says in verse 4, I cry aloud to God. But Augustine said this, but many men cry unto the Lord for the sake of getting riches and avoiding losses, for the safety of their friends, for the security of their house, for temporal felicity, for secular dignity, lastly, even for mere soundness of body. For such and such like things, many men do cry unto the Lord. Scarce one for the sake of the Lord himself. As if forsooth, or indeed, I had to look that word up in case I didn't know it. As if indeed that which he giveth could be sweeter than himself that giveth. This is what this psalmist meant. This psalmist has been crying out to God. He has been seeking God. And he's been crying out to him. And he's been seeking him for a lot of the same reasons that we all still do today whenever trouble comes. He's been crying out to God, trying to find out, why this happened? He's been seeking God, trying to figure out if God has just started getting angry with him and he's caused this. And what ultimately changes for this psalmist, is in verse 10 and 11. And in verse 10 and 11, what changes is that he changes why he starts seeking God. Originally, he was seeking God to try to understand why this stuff was going on in his life. Originally, he was seeking God to try to understand if God was angry at him, if God had some kind of, had forgotten to be gracious, if God's nature and character had changed. But what he realizes around verse 10 and 11 is that God hasn't changed, but my circumstances have changed. And if my circumstances have changed my view of God, then how lowly is my view of God? And what the psalmist began to understand, and what we can understand today, is that circumstances don't change the character of God. They change our perspective of the character of God. God doesn't change, our circumstances have, and because of that, we end up questioning who he is and what he's done for us. Verse 15, he says, "You with your arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph." What he's saying is he's talking about God's character, and he's saying, I'm going to remember who you really are, who I know that you really are. Not who I think that you are, but who I know that you are. And what he's saying is, I'm not going to stop at that, but I'm going to remember other things that you have done for people who've loved you, for people who've served you and been your children. I'm going to remember what you've done for them. That way I can hope for what you're going to in the future do for me. And he says that with your arm you redeemed your people. Meaning, people in the past who loved you, who served you, who worshiped you, you didn't let them go. Whenever everything seemed helpless, like there was no hope in Egypt, what you did is you reached down with what seemed like the most unlikely person, Moses and Aaron, and you reached down and you saved those people. You redeemed those people. And I'm gonna think on that and remember who you are because of things that you've done in the past. Maybe not even to me, but to people I know have loved and served you. He goes on in verse 16. This is where the psalm kind of starts getting weird. Verse 16, he says, "When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid." Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? "Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters. Your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron." These verses are kind of hard to understand. There's some what is oftentimes thought of as symbolism in these verses. And actually, I was reading different commentaries trying to figure out what these verses meant. And there's several commentaries or commentators who literally you can get to this part in their commentary and they'll be like, "I don't know what that means, dude." Seriously, a lot of commentators are like, "I don't know what that means." And I think where some of them may get kind of like off base is they're trying to explain every little word in here. When what we need to look at is like the general meaning of what these verses is talking about. He's talking about waters. He's talking about clouds and thunder. He's talking about, and in verse 19, it really gives us kind of what he's talking about, I think, more clearly. He says, "Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen." What does this sound like? To me, it sounds like he's talking about, since he was talking in verse 15, right before this, he was talking about Jacob and Joseph, people in the Old Testament who were the beginnings of the tribe of Israel. of the nation of Israel and how they were redeemed from Egypt, it seems to me like he's continuing that logical progression, and now he's talking about how he got them out of Egypt. And we remember how he got him out of Egypt. And when he got him out of Egypt, what did he have to do? He had to split the Red Sea open. He had to part the waters. So the waters trembled and shook at the sight of him. Your way was through the sea. Your path through the great waters. Yet your footprints were unseen. It sounds to me like what he's talking about is God getting them out of Egypt and by way of the Red Sea being parted. So again, what we see here is that he's talking about, he's remembering times that Israel, God's people who loved and worshiped God, that he redeemed them out of what seemed like impossible circumstances. And this is what we can hold on to today. And what we can take with us and grasp and put into our hearts and keep remembering is that what this psalmist first did starts in verse 1. What got him to verse 20, where he was so sure that no matter what the circumstances, that God was going to get him through it, what got him there was verse 1, whenever he said, I cry aloud to God. And what we need to realize today is that, and this is the whole point of the sermon, is this: to seek the source of blessings is a blessing. To seek the source of blessings is a blessing. And what this psalmist did is that what he started out doing right whenever his storm came, the trouble times came for him, what he started doing is he started seeking God. He started seeking the point from which the blessings all flowed from. And as he sought God, it wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always nice. Sometimes he questioned who God was. Sometimes he questioned God's might and his power and his character. But what he did is, the first thing that he did right is that he started to seek God. And as he sought God, he began to seek God, not for the blessings that God could give him, not for the circumstances that God could change for him, but he started to realize that the circumstances may stay the same. The circumstances may never even change, but what's most important to me is that I know the source of all the blessings that have ever been in my life, and what is most important to me is not that I need more blessings in my life, but what I need more than anything else is I need to know who the source of blessings is, and I need to have a relationship with him that's as close to him as I could possibly be. And then when I have that relationship, blessings may come, but the blessings won't even matter because I've got the source of blessings, and everything else in my life may be horrible and tragic, and I just don't even know what's going to happen in my life. But as long as I've got you, God, everything is okay. That's all that it takes. That's all that it takes is for us to seek the source of blessings. And by the way, a word about blessings came to us in Ephesians whenever the Apostle Paul said that you've already been given every spiritual blessing in the heavenly realm through Jesus. But we can have physical blessings in our life, and the thing that we need to remember is that we need to seek the source of blessings as first and foremost a blessing to us. We're blessed just to be able to seek him. I was thinking about this sermon and trying to work through some of these ideas, and I just had the thought that if we're creatures, if we are created by God and we're creatures, then the very act of us seeking God, seeking the Creator, doesn't show our ability or our magnificence, but instead it shows the mercy and grace of the Creator, doesn't it? The very act of this psalmist seeking the source of all blessings was where he began to be blessed. This psalmist, in the end, his circumstances didn't change, not that we know of. But his whole perspective of the circumstances drastically changed. And who he figured out who God was was drastically different than who he thought God was at the beginning. But he couldn't have got to verse 20 if he hadn't went through all the crud that was in the first few verses, right? Sometimes we need to just air things out with God. Some of you need to go home and just be like, God, here it is. I hope you don't hate me anymore. That's what we need. Some of us just need to air things out with God. And particularly if you're one of those people who came in and said, this is a horrible week, everything has gone wrong, this person in my family figured out this thing, this other person in my family is sick, and this thing that happened to me, I lost my job, and my bank account looks really, really bad right now. Some of you who came in like that this morning, what you need to realize more than anything else is that God wants to hear from you. And that when you seek Him, you're already going to begin the blessings. Your circumstances may not change, but the blessings are sure to come. And by the way, if you're one of those people who came in here this morning, one of God's most faithful men in the Bible that we learned about is King David. And in Psalm 42, King David said this. He said, "Why are you downcast, O my soul?" He says, put your hope in God. So in other words, what David was saying in Psalm 42 is he's saying, I know that I need to trust in God. I know that I need to hope in God, but his heart wasn't there yet. So if you came in this morning and you're like, yeah, I know to seek the source of blessings is a blessing. I know that. Then another thing that you may need to realize today is that you may know that in your head, and you may not know it in your heart. And what the thing is to keep seeking Him with the head, and eventually the heart will follow. Sometimes our heart isn't in being with God. It isn't in obeying God. But sometimes the best thing that we can do is say, you know what? I really don't want to obey you, God, right now, but I'm going to obey you anyways. And I'm hoping that the want to obey you will follow along with my obeying you. Does that make sense? This psalmist learned what the ultimate blessing is by just working things out with God. Sometimes we've got to just work things out with God, and we'll realize who He is. Sometimes we got to remember that to seek the source of blessings is a blessing. Other blessings may come, but there's none more valuable than the source of them. Let's pray. Father, we